I just wanted to give a little warning before I start this video. It does involve the death of a young child, so if you do not want to hear about this, I suggest you please do tune out and catch the next one. I tend to tell stories that don't get a lot of media coverage, but this one is an exception. There is just something about this story that is both fascinating and totally disturbing. April 23, 2006 was a bright but cool spring day in the Canadian prairies. Little 6-year-old Gareth happily went to his friend Jacob's house. Gareth had noticed that Jacob's dad's truck was in the driveway, so he thought he'd head over to see if 8-year-old Jacob wanted to come out to play. When Gareth got no answer at the door, being a 6-year-old kid, he peeked through the basement window. What he saw frightened him. He thought he seen what looked like a body with blood on it. Gareth ran home in terror and told his mother, who then went back with him to the house to check out and see what was going on. To her horror, when she peeked through the basement window, she could see what appeared to be a dead body face up on the basement floor, covered in blood, especially the face area, wearing just black boxers and arms up in a fighting position. She also thought she could make out another body, but just the legs which were sticking out from behind a couch. 911 was called. Police arrived to an absolutely horrific scene, which could only be described as a bloodbath. The scene was so bad that it left several seasoned officers traumatized for years to come. Authorities found the Richardson family murdered in their home on April 23, 2006 at 1 p.m. Dad Mark, age 42, Mom, Deborah, age 48, were both found in the basement stabbed to death. During a sweep of the house, 8-year-old Jacob was found in his bed with his throat slit, surrounded by his blood-spattered toys. At first, police didn't know what was going on. Was this a domestic violence incident? Was it a murder-suicide? They thought that because Mark had a bloody screwdriver laying next to him. Did an attacker kill the family? They really didn't know what the hell was going on. Then, when investigating the scene and trying to make sense of what had actually happened, an officer noticed a family portrait and realized that there were 4 people in the photo. There was the mom, Deborah, the dad, Mark, a daughter, and the son, Jacob. The mother, the father, and the son were all accounted for, but where was the daughter? This daughter was 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson. At first, police were concerned for Jasmine's safety. Where was she? Was she abducted by the attacker? Was she murdered somewhere else? Trying to figure out where Jasmine might be, police would head over to her school to see if the school could give them any information to help track her down. Police spoke with the school's counselor, who proceeded to haul out Jasmine's file, which was huge, by the way. Then the counselor went to check out her locker. While flipping through Jasmine's things, a piece of paper fell out. What was on this paper shocked the counselor and the police and moved Jasmine Richardson from victim to prime suspect. So this story took place in April of 2006 in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. Medicine Hat is a city in southeast Alberta, about 3 hours from Calgary and close to the Saskatchewan border. It is located along the South Saskatchewan River, and historically Medicine Hat has been known for its large natural gas fields, and because of these reserves, the city is known as the Gas City. By all accounts, the Richardson family was a loving, close-knit family living in a suburb of Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. Deborah and Mark Richardson were the parents and were described as easygoing and liked by everybody. They spent a lot of time with their kids, and they were like the cool parents. They both rode motorcycles. Mark and Deborah had met in 1990 while they were both working out at a gym in Sudbury, Ontario. They got together and committed themselves to a sober lifestyle, because previously they had both overcome substance abuse, and now they were committed to sharing a clean, sober life together. Friends would say that Mark and Deborah were the happiest couple ever. Soon they were married in Toronto, and 15 years after they got married, they decided to move out west to Alberta. Mark worked as an instrumentation technician in the oil and gas industry, and Mark was described as a bear of a man, handsome with a big bushy mustache. Deborah was described as beautiful, happy, and perky all the time. She was said to never be in a bad mood, and Deborah was interested in holistic healing, and she was preparing to set up a holistic therapy studio at home. They were just a regular, everyday family: mom, dad, a little girl, Jasmine, and a little boy, Jacob. Jasmine, who was their firstborn, was born in October of 1993. Jacob would come along a few years later. The family eventually moved to Medicine Hat, and I believe it was for work for Mark. Now, Jasmine was described as a pretty, wholesome, honor roll student who went to a Catholic school. She was involved in her school's fine arts program, she loved to draw and make music, and she was also on the swim team. By all accounts, young Jasmine was a happy and social girl with a sweet smile who grew up in a loving home. According to family and friends, there were no red flags, nothing whatsoever to predict what Jasmine's future would be. Jacob was 8, and he was described as your regular, energetic little boy. He liked to be the class clown. He was a sweet, innocent boy who loved Star Wars and hockey. Friends of the family would say that Jasmine loved Jacob, and she was often seen playing with him. Everything was normal. Everything was going good for the family, but soon, Jasmine would start to undergo a transformation. It started slowly at first, but she would eventually warp into, a monster. Jasmine started to change at around 11 years old. Nothing too strange, really. I mean, kids do go through changes, especially preteens. Deborah and Mark were not initially too concerned. I mean, transformation is a part of growing up. It's a part of finding out who you really are, finding ways to express yourself. Towards the end of grade 6, though, Jasmine and a couple of her friends started getting into darker music, darker makeup, and darker clothing. It was around this time that Jasmine started getting interested in goth culture. But mostly for Jasmine, it was the music, such as the band The Misfits, Cradle of Filth, Slipknot, and so on. Jasmine started wearing more black clothing. She was wearing more black eye makeup, but she wasn't really acting out too much yet. And a little side note here, Jasmine looked a lot older than what she actually was. She had matured very young and looked to be about 15 or 16. Meanwhile, she was only 11. And that will be important to this story. In the summer between grade 6 and grade 7, things started to take a turn for the worse for Jasmine. Jasmine and her friends started hanging out at the mall with a group of goth kids. Well, actually, some of the guys that were in this group were about 18 and 19 years old. Now that's quite the age difference from 11-year-old Jasmine. It was around this time that Jasmine started to dress older and more provocatively. She also started around this time joining social media sites such as MySpace, Nextopia, and VampireFreaks.com. Jasmine was sharing provocative photos of herself, portraying herself much older, like 15 or 16. She had also seemed to take on a bad girl persona online. Keep in mind that she is only 11 years old at this point. It was also around this time that Jasmine started hanging around with the boys in the goth group that were much older than her. And some of these boys also started calling Jasmine at home. By the time grade 7 rolled around, Jasmine's teachers and also her friends noticed a dramatic change in Jasmine. Also keep in mind that Jasmine was going to a Catholic school, which I am assuming was up in arms about her new makeup and clothing. By grade 7, Jasmine was also wearing short skirts, fishnet stockings, dark makeup, sometimes teardrops coming down her face, sometimes crosses on her face, and so on. So you can imagine how well this was accepted by her Catholic school. Jasmine was also starting to take on a darker persona. Her grades began to slip and her friends started to feel distant from her. When the older guys started calling Jasmine at home, obviously, Deborah and Mark got concerned. Like I mentioned, some of these guys were 18 and 19 years old. Jasmine's school also had concerns that she seemed to be going through a rebellious stage, getting smart with the teachers, things like that. And it was uncharacteristic of Jasmine, who was very smart, a very intelligent girl who had always before listened to the rules. Initially, it is believed that Jasmine was drawn to the artistic, brooding side of the goth scene. She enjoyed the music, the poetry, and she liked how the goth scene was non-judgmental. But Jasmine wasn't only acting different at school, though. And by this point, her parents were starting to get concerned. She was starting to get shit from her parents now because she was hanging out with a bunch of older guys. She started going to punk rock concerts with this group, and her parents were not happy. And then, of course, Jasmine and her parents started fighting more and more about all of this, but Jasmine just kept sinking deeper and deeper into this dark persona that she was creating for herself. In 2005, when Jasmine was just 12, she met Jeremy Steinke. Jasmine's 13-year-old friend Kaylee introduced them at the mall as part of the goth group. Jasmine liked how Jeremy was popular in this group. He was always the center of attention, and she just really liked that. And before this story goes any further, I think it's important to point out again that Jasmine was 12. Jeremy Steinke was 23. Again, Jasmine was 12. Now, Jeremy had a green Firebird, and at first, Jasmine and Jeremy would just hang out and do donuts in the mall parking lot. They were hanging out and started to slowly get closer. In February of 2006, Jeremy sent an email to Jasmine and asked her to be his girlfriend. Their first date was a few days later at a punk rock show. Jasmine says she told Jeremy she was 13, but Jeremy says he was under the impression that she was 16. Still, he's 23. Obviously, Jasmine kept their relationship secret because she knew her parents would not approve. And it's around this time that Deborah and Mark were fighting with Jasmine so much, and they had just had enough. So being good parents and trying to figure out what Jasmine was up to, Deborah and Mark began to monitor her online activity, like you would, and that is how they found out about Jasmine's relationship with Jeremy Steinke. Now, it's not exactly clear if Deborah and Mark knew Jeremy's age at this point, but they certainly knew that there was an age gap. In fact, some of Jasmine's friends didn't even believe that Jeremy was 23. Even some of Jasmine's friends had expressed their concern that a 23-year-old man was dating a 12-year-old child. When Deborah and Mark learned about Jeremy, that was enough. They put a stop to it and forbade Jasmine from having any contact with Jeremy. She was grounded and her computer was taken away. Now, I'm not sure how much Deborah and Mark actually knew about Jeremy, but let's just say Jeremy was very dark. He was a freaky-looking guy, kind of scary actually. He dressed in goth, wore a vial of blood around his neck. He claimed he loved the taste of blood, And oh yeah, he claimed to be a 300-year-old werewolf. You know, every parent's dream for their 12-year-old daughter. It was obvious, too, that Jeremy was having a negative influence on Jasmine. Because her grades were slipping, she was dressing and acting even more different, and she was distancing herself even more from her friends. At this point, Jasmine was allowed to go to school. She was grounded after school and on the weekends, and she had no computer access at home. Her parents put an end to the relationship, or at least that's what they thought. But Jasmine would just use the computer at school or the public library to keep in touch with Jeremy. And Jeremy was on the same social media sites that Jasmine was on, and that's how they were communicating. Jasmine would also call Jeremy around 2 or 3 a.m. from home. Jeremy would serenade Jasmine over the phone with songs that he wrote for her, and apparently Jasmine felt really flattered and loved. Jasmine's parents, meanwhile, were trying to get their sweet little girl back and suggested that they go to family counseling. And Jasmine agreed, so they did, and actually they started to see some improvements in Jasmine and thought that she might be coming back to them. As a sort of reward for this, Jasmine got some computer privileges back, and her parents told her that she could go to a punk rock show with a friend, with one catch: they had to go too. Not so much as chaperones, but more than anything, they wanted to check out the punk rock scene that their daughter was so involved in. Of course, the idea of her parents going with her was the heights of embarrassment to Jasmine, but she did agree. Now, while at this punk rock show, Deborah and Mark were kind of on the sidelines, looking on, but at one point they realized that they had lost track of Jasmine, and her friend didn't know where she was either. Lo and behold, when they found Jasmine, she was in an alleyway making out with Jeremy Steinke. Needless to say, Deborah and Mark were pissed. They dragged Jasmine home. Jeremy, meanwhile, took off running the other way down the alley. After this incident, this is when the hammer really came down. Deborah and Mark took Jasmine's computer away, they boxed it up, they took the music out of her room, and they really cracked down on monitoring her. And this is when Jasmine really started to lose it. Her and Jeremy started sending messages back and forth. Remember, she was using the computers at school to communicate with Jeremy. And I'll go into these messages a bit more later, but they are pretty dark messages. Around this time, Jasmine became really dark, to the point where her friends were afraid of her and the dark changes that she was going through. And reportedly, Jasmine actually enjoyed this. She liked the fear that she was instilling in people. At this point, the school guidance counselor was also very concerned about Jasmine's dress and her attitude. She had a pretty big fall with the school counselor by now. Jasmine even once told her school counselor that she wanted to go into foster care. When asked why she would say this, she said she just hated living under her parents' rule. When asked if they were abusing her, she said no. This tightening of the reins by Deborah and Mark sent Jasmine into a tailspin and major rage. She complained to her friends, but all of her friends just kind of agreed with her parents. They thought it was gross that Jeremy was dating a 7th grader. Meanwhile, Jeremy was complaining to his friends that his young girlfriend's parents were stopping her from seeing him, and his friends also agreed that it was totally inappropriate. So Jasmine and Jeremy were kind of getting into more of this attitude, like it's you and me against the world. So let's talk about Jeremy. Okay, so first, he is 23 and dating a 12-year-old child. Gross. Pedophile. Jeremy had a very different childhood than Jasmine. Jeremy had a very unstable upbringing. He moved around a lot. His mother was an alcoholic. and Jeremy had experienced severe abuse from his natural father as well as two stepfathers. And Jeremy was relentlessly bullied as a child. Reportedly, he was often called Stinky as a kind of pun on his last name, Steinke. When Jeremy met Jasmine, he was a high school dropout, he was unemployed, he was living in a trailer park with his alcoholic mother, and he had already tried to commit suicide at least once. There has been much speculation that Jeremy could have fetal alcohol syndrome. Developmental delays play a role in those who are on the fetal alcohol spectrum. ADHD is known to be associated, and Jeremy's mother would later testify in court that he did indeed have ADHD. Jeremy's mother was a known alcoholic who would go on binges, leaving him alone sometimes for a week. Now, Jeremy had gotten into the goth lifestyle at 22. And he really got into this goth lifestyle because for the first time in his life, this is where he found acceptance, even if he was much older than the rest of the group. Reportedly, Jeremy was very immature for his age. Many people describe him as probably only being mentally about 15 or 16 years old, and some say this is due to him being on the fetal alcohol spectrum. And a lot of people believe that is why Jeremy and Jasmine were able to bond so deeply. Jeremy was mentally 15 or 16. Meanwhile, Jasmine was very mature for her age. Though she was only 12, she mentally was about 15 or 16. Meaning that emotionally they both kind of matched up. Now don't get me wrong, I am not saying that this is what I think. I am just relaying what those who knew them have stated. From the age of 13, Jeremy claimed to like the taste of blood, and he wore a vial of blood around his neck. And he also claimed to be a 300-year-old werewolf. Jeremy's mother, Jacqueline May, would later say in court that Jeremy's father and stepfathers abused him. He was relentlessly bullied by his peers. He had been prescribed medication for depression and ADHD. Jeremy used marijuana daily. He cut his own arms, and he once attempted to hang himself. Quote, "He continuously said to me he wished he was dead, wished he was never born," unquote, said Jacqueline May. Jeremy, like I previously said, was a freaky-looking guy, with short, spiky hair, dark eyeliner. He wore black hoodies, fishnet stockings on his hands, and he would wear a cold-weather neoprene mask just because. He was a dangerous-looking guy. And Jeremy was also doing a lot of drugs. A girl who dated Jeremy when he was 20 and she was 17 said he could change in a blink of an eye, and sometimes would sit up in the middle of the night and talk to himself. After this breakup, Jeremy started dating younger and younger girls. After Jasmine's parents found her making out with Jeremy in the alleyway, and the hammer really came down, Jasmine started planning the massacre of her entire family. Yes, you heard that right. 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson planned the massacre of her entire family. Several friends of both Jasmine and Jeremy said she was begging Jeremy to kill her parents all of the time. She would tell Jeremy things along the lines of, "You need to do this. If you love me, you will do this." And also by now, Jasmine was sneaking out to be with Jeremy. Also by now, they were having sex, and Jeremy had given Jasmine a vial of his own blood. Again, Jasmine is 12. Jeremy is 23. They are having sex. Jasmine and Jeremy continued to communicate throughout this time, and the conversations became more and more violent. The two of them started planning a life together, away from her parents. Jeremy would write poems about slitting Jasmine's parents' throats, and Jasmine would complain how much she hated her parents and wanted them dead. Jasmine and Jeremy were messaging, sending emails, and he was writing poems and songs online that were really explicit and violently describing what they were going to do to her parents. Jasmine was constantly telling her friends and Jeremy that she hated her parents, she wanted them dead, but nobody really believed her. Nobody except Jeremy. On March 16, 2006, Jeremy emailed Jasmine asking her if she watched the movie Natural Born Killers. And he calls this movie the greatest love story of all time, and says that this is what he wants to do himself. Now, I've never seen the movie, but what I have read, it involves a storyline of a couple that kill the girl's family so they can be free from them. According to police reports, it was Jasmine who first proposed the plan. In an email, she told Jeremy she had a plan. On March 20th, 2006, Jasmine wrote to Jeremy online, quote, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you," unquote. The next day, March 21st, 2006, Jeremy replied to that idea with the quote, "Well, I love your plan, but we need to get a little more creative with, details and stuff," unquote. Jasmine at this point was constantly telling her friends, and especially Jeremy, that her parents were treating her like shit, and that she hated them so much. On March 24th, Jeremy wrote on his Windows Live Spaces account about Jasmine's parents, which read, quote, "Payment. My lover's rents are totally unfair. They say that they really care. They don't know what is going on. They just assume. As their greed continues to consume, she is slowly going insane. She continues to think that I came into her life to help her out, and to stop what they keep trying to shout. It's total bullshit. Their throats I want to slit. They will regret the shit that they have done, especially when I see to it that they are gone. They shall pay for their insolence. Finally, there should be silence. Their blood shall be payment," unquote. Jasmine started calling Jeremy and demanding that he fulfill the promise he made to her, which was to kill her parents. Allegedly, some people claim that Jeremy was reluctant, but Jasmine convinced him that the only way that they could be together was if he killed her parents. Less than a month after Jeremy's post on MySpace, Jasmine's family was dead. On Saturday, April 22nd, 2006, the Richardsons had a family barbecue in their backyard with the kids. Jacob was playing with his friend Gareth. Now, I haven't really been able to find out much about what Jasmine was up to that day, other than she had texted with a friend who asked if she wanted to go swimming the next day, and Jasmine took a bubble bath that evening. Meanwhile, Jeremy that day was busy getting drunk as a skunk and blitzed out of his mind on drugs. Throughout the day and night, Jeremy drank beer, he drank vodka, he drank wine, he smoked pot, he did lines of coke, he took ecstasy. Also, at some point that evening, Jasmine called Jeremy. It is unclear what was said in this call, but whatever Jasmine did say to Jeremy that evening was what got the ball rolling. Before this day, Jeremy had already asked at least two of his friends, named Jordan and Grant Bolt, on separate occasions if they would help him kill Jasmine's parents. They both had outright said no. Around 9 p.m., Jeremy went to see his friend Jordan, and again asks Jordan to help him kill Jasmine's family. Jordan again says no. It was while Jeremy was back at his trailer and he was watching the movie Natural Born Killers again with at least one friend, and he says again that this is the greatest love story of all time. This friend would later testify in court about a part in the movie where the couple kills her family except for her little brother. This is where Jeremy pipes up saying, "That is where it's going to be different. Jasmine is going to kill her little brother." Now, it's while watching this movie that Jeremy gets that call from Jasmine. And like I said, whatever Jasmine says in this call is what sets things into motion that night. At 3 a.m., Jeremy went to visit his coke dealer. This is where he snorted at least 6 lines of coke. He drank some more vodka. He drank vampire brand wine and did ecstasy. Jeremy then goes back home to his trailer. He drinks some more beer, grabs a knife from the kitchen, and starts to make his way over to Jasmine's house. He leaves his trailer approximately 3:30 a.m. He's higher than a kite, he's drunk as a skunk, but he stops at a store to buy a pack of gum. Why? Because Jasmine didn't like the smell of smoke on his breath. Meanwhile, he knows what he is doing, he knows where he is going, and he is thinking about gum. He has his black neoprene mask on, his fishnet stockings on his arms, and he's armed with a knife. He gets to the Richardson home, throws a pebble at Jasmine's window to let her know that he's there. Jasmine then goes and lets Jeremy in through the basement window. And it's while Jeremy is getting in through the window that he makes some noise, and this wakes up Deborah. Deborah goes downstairs meanwhile to see what is going on. Probably she is expecting to see her daughter either sneaking in from being out or sneaking out. Instead, Deborah is met by a crazed man in a mask who starts attacking her immediately and stabbing her, while she's still on the stairs wearing only her nightgown. Just imagine how scared Deborah must have been. She's screaming, and as Jeremy stabs her 12 times, he is screaming, "Die, die, die." Now Deborah's screaming wakes up Mark. He runs downstairs, grabs a screwdriver on his way, and he sees this madman stabbing Deborah. But by the point that Mark actually gets there, Deborah is already gone. Mark attacks Jeremy, and they have a ferocious fight. Police would later say that Mark fought like a bear, but eventually he also succumbed to his injuries. Jeremy stabbed Mark 24 times. And just before he died, Mark asked Jeremy why he was doing this, and Jeremy replied, "Because you treat your daughter like shit. It's what your daughter wanted." Now, meanwhile, Jasmine has been watching Jeremy kill her mother and her father from the top of the basement stairs. She later would claim that she went downstairs when Jeremy and Mark were fighting, but got scared and ran back upstairs. Who knows? But I doubt it. According to Jeremy, after Deborah and Mark were dead, he goes upstairs and meets Jasmine in the kitchen. Jasmine hugs and kisses Jeremy and tells him that she loves him. She then turns around and goes upstairs. He waits maybe like 30 seconds, and he goes upstairs to see what she's doing. He assumes she's grabbing some things or whatever, but he hears people talking. Jasmine had gone upstairs to her little 8-year-old brother, Jacob, who was yelling, "Jasmine, what is going on?" while he was cowering in his bed. Jasmine kept saying, "Shh, go to sleep," while cradling him, and she put his neck in the crook of her arm and started squeezing. She was trying to strangle Jacob, and he was digging his hands into her arm and was like, "Stop it. What are you doing?" He broke free and ran into the hallway. Jasmine and Jeremy would later not be able to agree on who said this, but one of them said, "We can't just leave him." Later, it was determined by police that Jacob had been repeatedly stabbed while fighting to get away. One of them slit Jacob's throat wide open, and Jacob died choking on his own blood. Jeremy claims Jasmine slit Jacob's throat and calmly walked past him. Jasmine barely rinsed the knife she used and just left it on the counter, where the police actually did find it. Again, she is 12, and she just slit her brother's throat. Jasmine then tells Jeremy to wait outside while she grabs her packed bag and her mom's purse. Meanwhile, Jeremy is paranoid out of his mind by this point, and then he drives back to the direction of his trailer, leaving Jasmine at her house alone. When Jasmine realizes that Jeremy just ditched her, she calls a cab. She grabs her mom's purse, she runs to 7-Eleven to take money out of Deborah's account, and takes the cab to Jeremy's trailer. Jeremy, at his trailer, then meanwhile takes a shower, bags up his bloody clothing. Oh yeah, his mother is not home, by the way, because she's off on another bender somewhere. Jasmine and Jeremy then go to an apartment building and throw away the bloody clothing in a dumpster behind it. They then wipe down the inside of Jeremy's mother's truck that they were using. And then reportedly they went to Jeremy's coke dealer's house, and the guy, the coke dealer, says Jeremy was an absolute mess. He was spaced out as hell, and he spooked him and asked the coke dealer how to clean blood off knives. Jeremy and Jasmine then have sex. There are some conflicting reports on where this happened, but regardless, they have sex not too long after they have just massacred her entire family. It is then reported that they go to a party the following day. Now, the place where this party is held is known to be a real party house. And at this party, they were reportedly going at it on the couch in front of everybody. At one point, Jasmine was straddling Jeremy on the couch and she was rubbing up against him. And it was so bad that it made several people feel very uncomfortable. Meanwhile, now this party is less than a mile from her house where her dead family is laying. And it was at this party that Jeremy confided in a close friend named James Wally that they had killed his girlfriend's family the night before. Jeremy said, quote, "I gutted them like a fish," unquote. The friend says that then Jasmine says in a mellow tone, quote, "My little brother gargled," unquote. At this party, Jeremy has a black eye. Now it's from his fight with Mark, and he's got on dark sunglasses and keeps lifting his glasses and showing his shiner to his friends, kind of like he was bragging or something. The same day as this party, meanwhile, the bodies of the Richardsons were found around 1 to 1:30 p.m. And by that evening, it's starting to break on the news. And Jasmine and Jeremy are starting to get nervous. Their friend Kaylee, the girl who had originally introduced them, said that she was making plans with friends, with a girl named Casey and a guy named Mick to drive to a town named Leader in Saskatchewan. So they asked Jeremy and Jasmine if they wanted to tag along, because everybody knew that Jasmine and Jeremy wanted to run away together. Now at this time, none of these other kids know what Jasmine and Jeremy have done. So Jeremy and Jasmine agree, and they lie down in the bed of the truck. In the front of the truck, there is Kaylee, Casey, Jenny, and this guy named Mick. And they all head off on a road trip to Leader, Saskatchewan. Now meanwhile, back at the crime scene, when the bodies are being found that afternoon, it is an absolute bloodbath. Blood had been sprayed all over the walls, the floors, the ceilings. There were bloody handprints and blood streaks on the walls like someone had scraped their hand or arm across the wall. It was absolutely horrific. Once the police found Deborah, Mark, and Jacob, and then eventually realized Jasmine was missing, and they went to her school to try and find out where she could be. They were looking for some clues about Jasmine and what could have happened to her. And like I said, the counselor goes to Jasmine's locker, and while she's flipping through Jasmine's things, a piece of paper falls to the floor. Now, when the police and the counselor look at this piece of paper, they found a stick figure drawing of a girl lighting a house on fire with her family inside. And this girl is running to her boyfriend's truck saying, "Wahahaha." This turned Jasmine immediately from a missing person to a murder suspect. Now again, back to the evidence at the home. Police concluded that there was a major bloodletting incident that happened outside of Jacob's bedroom, in the hallway, and also in his bedroom they concluded that the bloodletting source was moving around. There was blood everywhere, outside of the bedroom, and in the bedroom, and the conclusion was that Jacob had been attacked in the hallway, but then he had moved back into his bedroom, and after a fair amount of activity, he died on his bed. One of the officers said that it was the worst crime scene that he had ever been in, and he had been in some bad scenes. He could tell that the dad was a warrior. Mark fought until his last breath, as did Jacob. Jacob died with a lightsaber next to him, covered in blood. It is suspected that Jacob had grabbed his lightsaber to try and use it to protect himself. Deborah, in the meantime, had not moved around too much from where she was found, so she probably had died quicker. Police found a blood smear on Jasmine's light switch in her bedroom, and this indicated to them maybe that it was not an intruder, but maybe rather someone who knew the house, because generally speaking, intruders do not turn lights on and off. Police also thought immediately that this was the work of at least two people, because there was no way that this was possible that one person could have done all of this by themselves. Initially, police had put out an alert for Jasmine, because they thought she was kidnapped, or worse. But after finding the drawing of Jasmine's family being murdered, and online activity they found, and from talking to Jasmine and Jeremy's friends who were starting to trickle into the police by this point, a bulletin was sent out by Medicine Hat Police on Sunday, April 23rd, 2006, stating to be on the lookout for Jasmine and Jeremy and the truck, and that they were probably heading in the direction of Leader, Saskatchewan. And police knew this because of the friends of Jasmine and Jeremy that were starting to trickle in, were telling police that is where they believed that they would be heading. How shocked everybody would be when the true extent of Jasmine's involvement would come to light. It was actually unbelievable. It is believed that Jasmine is the one who stabbed Jacob. Jeremy would later go on to admit killing Deborah and Mark, but absolutely, to this day, refuses any role in the murder of Jacob. Jacob showed signs that he had been strangled, even though this was really difficult to say for sure because of the huge wound that was on his neck from his throat being slit. And this does match what Jeremy said that Jasmine was doing, and later Jasmine would actually admit that she did try to strangle Jacob. It is believed Deborah died a bit quicker than Mark and Jacob, as she had a fatal wound to her aorta. Both Deborah and Mark had a lot of defensive wounds on their arms and hands. And out of the 24 stab wounds to Mark, neither one of them was in and of itself fatal, but rather his death was caused by a cumulative effect of all the stab wounds he suffered and blood loss. So back to Jeremy and Jasmine. A rookie cop was out on patrol in Leader, Saskatchewan. Now this cop had seen the bulletin put out on Sunday, April 23rd, 2006 from the Medicine Hat Police saying, "Be on the lookout for these two suspects who are wanted in a triple homicide, and that they could be heading his way." So this rookie cop was on the lookout all evening, but he didn't see anything, so he finished up his shift and went home around 2 a.m., but he woke up early around 5 that morning, Monday, April 24th, 2006, and he had a hunch. He thought, these kids are probably going to need gas, so he heads to the biggest gas station in town. He parks his cruiser at the corner and hangs out, just waiting to see if he would see anything. And then, lo and behold, around 7 a.m., a little pickup truck pulls in with the license plates that match the description of the vehicle. He watches as 3 girls get out of the front of the truck. That is Casey, Kaylee, and Jenny. The Girls would later say that when they went into the gas station, they seen the newspapers with the murder of Jasmine's family splashed all over the front, and that there was a big picture of Jasmine right on the front. The girls still don't know what Jasmine and Jeremy have done. The girls buy the newspaper and head back out to the truck. They show the newspaper to Jeremy and Jasmine. Reportedly, Jasmine giggles when she sees it, and Jeremy is laughing and says, quote, "That doesn't even look like you," unquote. Reportedly, Casey says to Jasmine something along the lines of, "If that were my family, I would be totally freaking out." But reportedly, there was absolutely no reaction whatsoever from Jasmine. Casey later would report that Jasmine told her to tell the police if they asked that Jeremy had picked Jasmine up at 11 p.m. the night before, and they went to Jeremy's coke dealer's house, and Jeremy and the coke dealer had gotten into a fight, which is what's supposed to account for an alibi, as well as why Jeremy has a black eye. This group of kids leave the gas station and pull into a high school parking lot, and this is where they're trying to figure out what to do next. The girls know by now what Jasmine and Jeremy have done, but they don't know what to do. Now, meanwhile, the rookie cop has been following them from a distance and has called in backup. When his backup arrives, they ambush the truck. They find their suspects hiding under a blanket in the bed of the truck. And Jasmine has no pants on. At 7:51 a.m., they order Jeremy and Jasmine out of the truck, and the whole lot of them are taken to the police station. Tuesday, April 25th, 2006 is when Jasmine was first interrogated. Jasmine didn't deny her involvement and said, "I loved him so much, I thought it would bring us closer." And it was also noted that when Jasmine was arrested, she showed very little, actually no, remorse. During Jasmine's interrogation, she told so many different stories about the night of the murders. She also told many different stories about what really had happened to Jacob before finally admitting that it was her who slit his throat. At first, Jasmine completely blames Jeremy for everything. Then slowly, Jasmine admits that she stabbed her brother, but not very hard. Then she claims that Jeremy is the one who finished him off. But then Jasmine, with some more pressuring, finally admits that she was the one who killed Jacob, saying she did it because it would be unfair to leave him without parents. He was just too sensitive for that. When Jasmine finally broke, she said she was originally trying to strangle Jacob so that he would pass out and not feel pain. She said she went into his bedroom, she was trying to calm him down, and Jeremy came upstairs and began saying, "We need to kill him. You can't just leave him." And she had a knife. She was having a really hard time, she claims, but Jeremy was really pressuring her. The officer asked Jasmine if Jacob was crying, and she said Jacob was saying, "I'm too young to die," over and over. Then the officer asks Jasmine where the knife came from. She says it was one that she had in her bedroom from before. She took it into Jacob's bedroom. She didn't really know what she was going to do with it, but she didn't want Jacob to suffer. She knew he couldn't go through life without his parents. He was already so scared about other stuff. Jasmine tells the officer that Jeremy did it out of love for her. The officer then tells Jasmine, "Why don't you go ahead and write a letter to your parents apologizing?" So she does, and in the letter she apologizes to them, saying that she always loved them, and that she hopes that they can forgive her and Jeremy because he is so good to her. The officer then tells Jasmine that she can communicate with Jeremy and that he could get notes to Jeremy for her. All of this, meanwhile, is just a tactic to get Jasmine to put things on paper. And it works. And they do send notes back and forth. And she wrote that letter to her parents, but at trial, it was determined that all of this was inadmissible because Jasmine's rights as a youth offender were not protected. Anyway, Jasmine and Jeremy do write notes back and forth, And in one of these notes, Jeremy asks Jasmine to marry him, and she accepts. Now, meanwhile, while this is going on, friends of both Jasmine and Jeremy are trickling into police and telling them about how Jasmine was saying that she wanted her parents dead, but nobody believed her. Jeremy was saying that they were going to do it. A couple of Jeremy's friends were coming forward with reports that he had asked them for help to murder Jasmine's family. On Wednesday, April 26, 2006, Jeremy is interrogated. He admits to murdering Jasmine's parents because he says he freaked out and he was high on drugs. He also says that he had tried to convince Jasmine before all of this not to do it, but he also says that he would do anything for Jasmine. Jeremy claims without even being asked that Jasmine killed Jacob. He says that he went upstairs and watched her cut her own brother's throat. When he asks why Jasmine would do that, Jeremy says she did it because she knew it had to be done. During Jeremy's interrogation, reportedly at one point, he became really upset and started hitting the concrete wall, and said that he didn't want to kill anybody, and that he was shocked by Jasmine's reaction to the murders. She didn't even seem upset. Throughout the investigation, online accounts belonging to both Jeremy and Jasmine revealed that it was Jasmine who came up with the murder plan. For example, the email from Jasmine to Jeremy that read, "I have a plan. It begins with killing them and ends with me living with you." Jasmine discussed her plans to kill her parents with her friends, but again, nobody believed her. Jeremy's friend, Grant Bolt, reported that Jeremy had told him that Jasmine was going to break up with him unless he killed her family. Jeremy then asked Grant if he would help him, and Grant says no. Now, the friend James Wally that Jeremy and Jasmine had told about the murder at the party the day after the murders also comes forward to police and tells them what he knows. He tells them that Jeremy had admitted that he gutted Jasmine's family like fish, and that Jasmine had said her little brother gargled as he was dying. Also, Jeremy's friend Jordan, the other guy who Jeremy had asked to help kill Jasmine's family, shows up at the police station and tells the police that Jeremy had asked him to help him with the murders. Jasmine and Jeremy were tried separately because of her age. Also because of her age, Jasmine's identity was protected and still is protected under Canada's Youth Justice Act. No media to this day is allowed to say her name. She is simply referred to as JR, but of course Jasmine's name did leak out. In June of 2007, aged 14, Jasmine Richardson went on trial for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Jasmine sobbed the whole time, but reportedly it wasn't a sad cry. It was more theatrical. Jasmine entered a non-guilty plea because she was saying that Jeremy had did it. And remember, those notes and that letter that she had written were not allowed to be admitted at trial because they said that her rights as a youth were not protected during her confession. Jasmine's defense said that she was a child who was under the influence of a predator, Jeremy Steinke. Jasmine testified at her own trial. She said that everything she had said about wanting her family dead was just jokes, and she didn't think anybody would take her seriously. Meanwhile, the prosecution tore Jasmine's story to shreds. When asked about why, if she's claiming Jeremy just killed her family and allegedly she is scared of him and she didn't want him to kill her family, why did you have sex with him after? Jasmine says she was scared and Jeremy wanted to make her feel better. The prosecution bombards Jasmine with a barrage of questions about the things she could have done to get help if she was so scared. To which Jasmine repeatedly admitted, "No, I did not do that," or "Yes, I did do that." During the trial, Jasmine testified that she was in a zombie state at the time of the killings and was unable to stop her boyfriend or go for help. Jasmine testified, quote, I was like a zombie. I could barely function. It didn't even enter my mind to call 911, unquote. The Crown told the court the girl had plenty of opportunities during and after the killings to call 911 or go for help, but she never did. She confessed on the witness stand to trying to choke Jacob and stabbing him once after he ran to her for help during the attack. At trial, police officers and other witnesses became emotional as they recalled finding the small boy on his bed with a deep slash to his throat, his eyes and mouth wide open. Stuffed animals and a toy lightsaber spattered with the boy's blood lay next to his body. Now, meanwhile, Jasmine is described as having dead eyes. Reportedly, she showed absolutely no remorse or any emotion whatsoever for the killing of her entire family. And on November the 8th, 2007, Jasmine Richardson was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 10 years. Yes, 10 years, which is the maximum allowed by Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act. Jasmine was credited 18 months for time served and ordered to spend 4 years in a psychiatric facility and the remaining 4.5 years under conditional supervision in the community. While under conditional community supervision, Jasmine was allowed to attend Mount Royal College in Calgary, Alberta. Jasmine Richardson was released on parole in 2016 at the age of 23. She now has a new identity and is living in a secret location. Although it has been reported that she responded well to rehabilitation, it is not known whether or not Jasmine is still in contact with Jeremy. Announcing her absolute freedom, Queen's Bench Justice Scott Brooker told Jasmine, quote, "I think your parents and brother would be proud of you. Clearly you cannot undo the past. You can only live each day with the knowledge you can control how you behave and what you do each day," unquote. There is more. As of 2020, Jasmine's record is expunged, meaning that she has no record. She is free to live or work wherever she wants, even with kids if she chooses to do so. And she never has to disclose her past because she no longer has a record for brutally murdering her mother, her father, and her little 8-year-old brother, Jacob. Unbelievable. Jeremy's trial was held at the Calgary Court Centre. The prosecution hurled rapid-fire questions and grilled Jeremy Steinke under cross-examination, challenging his earlier testimony that he was extremely drunk and high on drugs the night of the killings. The prosecution pointed out that Jeremy was able to drive to a store, he was able to buy gum, and then he was able to drive to his girlfriend's house, where he was then able to throw a pebble at her window. Jeremy then conceded that he followed the girl's instructions to meet at the back of the home, and that he was able to enter quietly through a basement window. Jeremy also agreed that despite his impairment, he was able to drive home after the killings, he was able to take a shower, and wash the blood off from the attacks. Prosecution also wondered why Jeremy only watched rather than helped the injured boy or call 911. The Crown prosecutor presented a recording of a conversation Jeremy had with an undercover cop who was posing as a prisoner while Jeremy was being transported to a Calgary lockup. In this recording, Jeremy admitted that he was responsible for the deaths and gave details of the killings. In the recording, Jeremy says, quote, "You hear about that triple homicide? Yeah, well, you're looking at 'em. Me and my old lady have become legends," unquote. He told the officer that Jasmine slit her brother's throat, saying, quote, "It didn't bother her at all either. She didn't cry or anything. In fact, the next day when we were on the road, she was laughing about it. She's got a few screws loose too," unquote. Jeremy also said Jasmine's dad fought like hell, and the last thing that he remembered, he was lying on the ground and Mark asked Jeremy why. and Jeremy said because you treat your daughter like shit and she wanted it this way. Jeremy tells the undercover cop that this is when he goes upstairs and watches his girlfriend Jasmine cut her brother's throat. Allegedly, this undercover cop would say that the details of what Jeremy told him were so horrific that he felt nauseous and wanted to throw up. The Crown also disputed Jeremy's claim that he was only acting macho during this taped conversation, when Jeremy bragged about the triple slaying and said it was a plan concocted by the girl. Jeremy said he was trying to act macho to fit in with someone that he thought was a criminal, but prosecution questioned whether it would have been more macho to claim that it was his own plan rather than blaming the girl. The prosecutor asked, quote, "You thought telling him that you had snuck in through a family's basement window while they were sleeping and stabbed an unarmed mother to death made you look macho?" Unquote. "Yes, ma'am," replied Jeremy. The prosecution then asked, quote, "And you thought telling the officer you stood by while your 12-year-old girlfriend killed her 8-year-old brother would make you look tough and impressive?" Unquote. "Yes, ma'am," was the answer. Jeremy admitted on the stand that he stabbed the parents to death, but repeatedly denied having anything to do with the killing of 8-year-old Jacob, saying that it was Jasmine who slashed her brother's throat as he watched from the doorway. Jeremy said that he murdered Deborah and Mark because he was totally bonkers off his mind, high on drugs. He claimed he was just there to get Jasmine, and they were just going to leave. He never intended to hurt anybody, and that what had happened was all in self-defense. Total bullshit. Jeremy's defense attorney would claim that he was an immature man, like a boy, and he was in love with Jasmine and would do anything to keep her. Jeremy's defense tried to say the events were fueled by a drug and alcohol haze, and that he didn't really know what he was doing. The Crown suggested that the crime was loosely based on Jeremy's favorite movie, Natural Born Killers. Like I said, was the twisted love story about a pair of young serial killers who kill the female's family. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences in prison, without the possibility of parole for 25 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2031, which is actually only 10 years from now. Jeremy Steinke is in an Edmonton prison where he continues to serve 3 concurrent life sentences. Jeremy Steinke has changed his name in prison to Jackson May and has made a failed appeal against his sentence. Now, there is a lot of mixed feelings surrounding Jasmine's punishment, as you can imagine. Some people think it was too lenient, while others feel that she actually does deserve a second chance. Many people actually believe that it was Jeremy and not Jasmine that was pressured into killing her parents. And of course, that is what it seems like when you look at the evidence. It seems like it should be the other way around, the young, impressionable girl being pressured and intimidated by a much older man, but that's not actually the case. Once all of the emails and social media posts came out, it was clear that Jasmine Richardson was the mastermind, and she was only 12 years old. Police forensics found that Jasmine was encouraging Jeremy, and she kept asking him to kill her parents. And when she was asked why they committed the murders, Jasmine said, quote, "I loved him so much, I thought it would bring us closer," unquote. When Jeremy was asked why he murdered Jasmine's family, he said, quote, "When you find your soulmate, you do anything for them. I did anything," unquote. What in the world could make a 12-year-old girl murder her entire family? In his final sentence review for Jasmine Richardson, Justice Scott Brooker noted, quote, "You've indicated through your conduct over the last 8.5 years you have a desire to atone for what you did," unquote. Apparently, the years of intensive psychotherapy and reintegration into society have paid off. And during her final sentence review hearing, Jasmine briefly thanked the judge and her team, but she never did say she was sorry for her crimes. Brooker echoed his final message to Jasmine with the profoundly compassionate advice he gave her when he first sentenced her, quote, "JR, you can never undo what you did to your mother, father, and little brother. But what you can do is dedicate your life to being the woman your mother, father, and brother would be proud of," unquote. The day before Jasmine was set free, Brooker reflected on Jasmine's progress and concluded, quote, "I think your parents would be rather proud of you," unquote. Even while Jasmine and Jeremy were in prison, they continued to send each other letters, professing their love to one another, but it is unclear today if they are still in contact. Jasmine Richardson is believed to be the youngest Canadian convicted of multiple murders. Do you think Jasmine is rehabilitated? Do you think she deserves to live a new life, free from the brutal massacre of her entire family? It's a hard question to answer. The automatic response is no. She orchestrated the murders of 3 people, one being her 8-year-old little brother. But then you go, okay, she was 12, so maybe?